Jonah chapter 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own god, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, and we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all of this trouble for us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord, because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried to the Lord, "O Lord, please do not let us die from taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights.
All right, thank you, Rosie. Thank you very much for that. Good morning, everybody. I've always loved the story of Jonah because there's so much we can take from it. The question I want to start out with is, have you ever had a word from the Lord? Has God ever spoke to you and told you to do something? I've been a Christian. I'll be a Christian this August, 25 years. And that's something I'm really thankful for. But in the church, yeah, you can give God a clap for that one, seriously. It was a miracle, believe me. God has pursued me all my life, and I finally just said, "Yes, God." But when I surrendered my life to Christ, I remember the church that I did that at. They taught us that God speaks to us, and we see that throughout the Bible that God uses different ways and different things to speak to us. He'll speak to us through His Word, Him as well. He'll speak to us in a lot of different ways, and He'll speak to us through messages. But one thing that I learned about when God speaks to us is that He will never tell us to do something that contradicts His Word. All right, give me a second. Are we getting a mic? Excuses technical difficulties. All right, is it better now? He'll never tell us to do something that contradicts His Word. So if we think we're hearing from God and it contradicts His Word, it's simply not from God. If we think that if we believe in something that contradicts His Word, that's not from God. So I'm not a person that prays about every little decision, right? I ask God to give me wisdom. I do pray for that. So God, give me wisdom to make good biblical choices. And I can get into God's Word, and so I understand how to navigate that most of the time. However, for the bigger decisions in my life, I do pray. And I'm like, God, I need to hear from you. I need to know what you want me to do in this situation. And so for me, it's not some audible voice. I've actually known people who have heard an audible voice. It's not me. Usually it's kind of a knowing, and I like to say it that way. It's kind of an unction. It's not a feeling. I don't go by feelings because for me, I believe feelings are fleeting. Feelings can lie to us. And so it's just kind of a knowing, or it's something that might just kind of pop in my head. For example, when I was going to start at Trinity, before I even knew and heard and found out about Trinity, I heard from God. I was spending time praying. And at that time, I had been out of full-time paid ministry working for a church for about a year and a half. I was going through a lot, and I been through a lot, and I went through a lot of healing. And so I knew that it was time to go back, and because I knew my calling was still there to work for a church, and I knew that God was calling me to do that. I spoke with a couple friends of mine who I'd been meeting with, being accountable with. We prayed together, and they're like, yes, they kind of gave me a thumbs up, said, we believe that you should be back into ministry as well. I asked them, if they thought, they both agreed. And so one day I was praying. One morning I was praying, and I heard this. It just popped in my mind, 9 months. And what I knew when that happened to me, I knew that God was saying it's going to be month 9 before you get back into working for a church. And when I heard that, remember it was January of that year, I was really frustrated because I wanted a good thing. I desired a good thing. God, I'm asking you for a good thing. I'm not asking you for like $10 million, which would be great too if you want to give it to me. But that wasn't what I was asking for. I just wanted to fulfill that I believe what the calling was for my life. And so I talked to God about that. But, how many of you know you can't bargain and reason with God? So I said 9 months. And so what that meant for me is that I had to stop looking. I had to stop, checking things out online, talking to people about it. Around April of that year, there were a couple of people that called and said, hey, we have a position at our church, or we have a position at our church, and, we think that you'd be a good fit for it. I knew that wasn't God because it hadn't been 9 months. And so it was so tempting, though, to go apply and just do it anyways and say, oh, God, I hope you're going to bless it. But I decided not to do that. I decided just to work through my frustrations. And I wanted to say, okay, God, I'm just going to be obedient to what you have me do. And so then around July of that same year, I was at an event. And at this event, I saw a friend that I haven't seen in years. So he just, he's like, hey, what have you been up to? We started talking. And I told him that I want to get back into working for a church. And then we got interrupted. We didn't finish our conversation, and that was it. A couple days later, I get a call from somebody who knew this friend and said, hey, I heard you're looking for a ministry position. There's one available at our church. I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's closer to the 9 months, and let's talk. So we met at for coffee somewhere, and then he ended up being somebody from Trinity. He introduced me to Joel. I went through the interview process, and guess which month was it when I started at Trinity Church? It was September of that year. It was 9 months. It was month 9. It was September 17th of that year. Now, I share all this because I just want you to know that God still speaks to us. And I can give you other stories where God has commanded me to do something and I didn't do it, or he's asked me to do something and I didn't do it. And there were some consequences for those things. But he speaks to us, and I think but we don't understand how much he does because we just don't listen much. For me, I'm nobody special. Sometimes every once in a while, don't tell any of the elders this, but every once in a while, I'm like, man, I wish, or don't tell God this, I wasn't a pastor, because I want people to see that, no, we can live a life where God does interact with us, and you don't have to be a pastor for that to happen. So the question that I have for everybody here is, I have a few different questions, is what is God speaking to you? What has he been asking of you? What's God's word for you? What has he revealed to you? What has he requested of you? What does he have for you? What has he requested in your life that he wants to change? And what has he commanded you to do? In the last series that we went through called Open Heart, I put a challenge out there and asked, do you need major heart surgery? Is there something that God wants to touch in your heart that he wants to heal? Or is there something God's been asking of you, and either you've been ignoring it or you've been saying no to him? Well, we see that in Jonah chapter 1, God commands something of Jonah. He says, the word of the Lord came to him and he said, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because there's wickedness that's in this city. And what did Jonah do? We know the story. He ran from the Lord. He ran to Tarshish and he found a ship, and it said he was fleeing from the Lord. So kind of a summary there is that God called and Jonah ran. When we hear from God, we all have to make a choice as to how we're going to respond. Jonah had to make a choice as to how he was going to respond. And since the beginning, God's been speaking and creation listens. God spoke and the earth was formed. God spoke and everything that was in chaos, everything that was chaotic was brought into order. God spoke and the animals were created. So God spoke and they obeyed. But Jonah, like us, God speaks and Jonah ran from the Lord. Now, one version says that Jonah ran away from the presence of the Lord. And that's silly because we can never run from God's presence. God is everywhere at the same time. But whenever we run from God, in other words, whenever we sin, we want to run from God's presence. And that's why people will stop coming to church, because they start giving into the sin that wants their attention. They're trying to run from God's presence. And it doesn't make sense because God is everywhere. So it can't be done. So God speaks, and sometimes he's going to tell us to do hard things. He's going to tell us to do hard things that we don't want to go through. Sometimes he'll command us to do things that we just don't want to do. Like he might say, I want you to forgive that person. You're like, God, I don't want to forgive that person. They don't deserve forgiveness for what they've done. God, I don't want to move to that state. It's too conservative for me. God, I don't want to move to that state. It's too liberal for me. God, I don't want to go to that church because they don't believe in everything that I believe. God, I don't want to share my faith because I don't want to make the person feel uncomfortable. I don't want to push my religion on them. Or God, I don't want to quit my job even though I know you're telling me to go take this one over here. And so on and so on. God will tell us to do hard things. I had a friend working for a company, and he had a phenomenal position. He was making well into the six figures. He didn't even have to work 40 hours a week to do it. He loved the people that he worked with. He loved the people that, he loved the things that he was doing. An opportunity came up where he gets a call, and he looked at it, and it sounded great as well. It sounded just as good as the place he was working at. But he found out that it was only half the pay. But to his credit, he decided to pray about it anyways, because he understood something bigger might be at work here. And so he prayed, and sure enough, he sensed that God was telling him to take that job at half the pay. And so he was obedient. He actually ended up doing it. I'm like, that's crazy to me, especially in this area. But God often asks us to do very hard things. So God speaks to Jonah. He says, go to Nineveh. And Nineveh was founded by a guy named Nimrod. And Nineveh, there were evil people that lived there. They were violent. They worshipped a demon god. And they worshipped so much that if you didn't worship and think like they did, they would enslave you, or they might even take your life. Their city was fortified by these huge walls. They say they were so thick that you could have 3 chariots side by side riding around the walls at the same time. They were so evil that they tried to wipe the people of Israel off the earth 3 times. Nineveh is actually located near modern day Mosul, Iraq is today. Now imagine God coming to you and saying, all right, I want you to pack up. I want you to wear your American flag t-shirt. I want you to go to Iraq, and I want you to tell them that they're sinning, preach against them, and tell them God's going to bring judgment if they don't repent. How many of you guys would sign up for that one? Right? Nobody would. We wouldn't do that. That just wouldn't go over well. That's definitely one. We say no to God for easy stuff here, much less that. But here's the deal. God has the authority and God has the right to call us to do some tough stuff. And Jonah responds like much we respond. He comes up with his reasons, He's telling God, he's basically telling God, God, there are things that I'll surrender to you, but there are things I don't want to surrender to you. There are things that I want to talk to you about, and there are things I don't want to talk to you about. God, I want to serve, but I only want to serve when and where I want to serve. I want to serve as long as I feel appreciated. But then when I don't feel appreciated anymore, I'm out. I want you to bless my life, even though I know there's things in my life that you don't approve of. We're all like this. I'm Jonah. We're Jonah. We're all like this. So Jonah boarded this ship to Tarshish. You understand, there will always be a ship that we can board that will take us where we want to go. But it doesn't mean that ship is from God. This ship was not part of God's will for Jonah. Sometimes, and we're in these situations, we can try to spiritualize it. We can be like, well, God must have provided the ship. I prayed, and he must have provided it for me, because if he didn't, it wouldn't have been there. God, I prayed for you to remove this from my life. You didn't remove it, so it must be okay. God, I really didn't, I don't know if that's from you, but it was there, and so it must be. You must have provided it. We have to remember that Satan has power too. And he can provide ships too. And this is where we need discernment between what's from God and what's not from God. In the Old Testament, we read a story about a guy named Jacob. And a lot of you guys know about Jacob. And there's a famous story where he steals his brother's, what they call a birthright, and his brother Esau. And Esau is so upset that Esau's having thoughts of taking his brother's life, of killing him. Jacob hears about it, and so Jacob flees and takes off far away. And Jacob's gone, and while he's living his life somewhere else, he has family, he has wives, he has kids. He works for his father-in-law, and he does this over a course of about 20 years. And during this time, there are some issues that start to happen with him and his father-in-law. So one day in the middle of the night, he takes all his wealth, he takes all his kids, his families, and he takes off. And on his way to where he was going, he comes across a couple of men and meets them, talks to them. It turns out that they work with Esau, his brother. So Jacob remembers 20 years ago, his brother wanted to take his life. So this fear comes on him. He starts to get scared. And he's finally realizing that I'm going to have to face this after running from it for 20 years. When God gives us a command and he reveals something that he wants to do, eventually it's going to catch up to us. And sometimes God will make us deal with it immediately, but sometimes he'll wait and he'll be patient. And he'll give us 20 years as an example. But do you believe that God has the right to call you wherever he wants to call you? You are here for a mission. And your assignment is not over until Jesus returns or until you go home to him. I think for the Christian, there's no such thing as a spiritual retirement. We may retire from working our jobs, but we're always supposed to be serving the Lord and doing what He wants us to do. If you're still here, that means that God still has a work in you and has a work for you. So in verse 4 it says, "The Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm rose that it threatened to break up the ship. And all the sailors were afraid. And guess what they started to do? They started to cry out to their gods. And where's Jonah? Sleeping. Said he went to a deep sleep. I'm like, man, I wish I could sleep like Jonah. How can you be on a deep sleep when all this is happening around you? I like to sleep like that normally. But he was in this deep sleep, and the captain comes in, wakes him up, is like, pray to your God. And then the sailors are like, we need to figure out what's going on. Why is this happening to us? So it says that they casted lots, and they found out that it was Jonah's fault. Then they started asking him questions. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? And then Jonah answered, he says, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. To summarize that, we can say that God pursues Jonah. I mean, he sent a great wind. And these people that made a living on a ship by being there, they were scared because this wind was so out of control. They were so scared that they started to get all their stuff and all their profits and started throwing it overboard. The stuff that was costing them money. And then they started crying out to their gods. All of a sudden they started to get religious and spiritual. It's like, okay, you pray to your God, you send up good vibes, you pray to Buddha, you pray to Allah, you pray to whoever, and let's see if this storm could stop. When people go through a hard time, when a crisis comes, spiritual people get really devout for a short amount of time. They pray, they start to bargain with God. God, if you can get me out of this, I promise I'll start going to church on Sunday. God, if you can do this for me, if you can rescue me, I promise that I'll give up this, and this. God, if you can do this, I promise, fill in the blank. I have a friend who used to do this. Whenever he'd go through a hard time, he'd be like, he would just do that as if that can protect him. He'd be like this all the time. But when the crisis goes away, all of a sudden, all those promises to God are gone. And God knows that. And it happens because they don't understand the love of God. They're just scared, and they'll say anything so that the pain or the whatever's happening to them will go away. In the middle of all of this, Jonah was asleep. And the captain found him sleeping and had him call out to his God. See, Jonah's sin involved and it affected other people. Our sin affects other people. Jonah was the one running from God, and because of him, the storm was happening, the ship was breaking up, the prophets were lost, all because of his sin. And when people are in crisis, most of the time they will want prayer. They came to Jonah, pray to your God. And we need to, if you're a Christian, we need to be ready to pray with people. It doesn't matter whether you're comfortable with it or not. We need to be looking for it. When people are going through tough times, be ready and waiting for that invitation so you can step in there and call out to the one true God. Because people who don't know God, they'll always look to the people who do know God. That same guy that always do this all the time, I can't tell you how many times he called me in the middle of the night asking me to pray for him. They may not want you to talk to them about Jesus, but they will want you to pray for them when they're going through something hard. And it's interesting because Jonah knew God. He knew how powerful God is. He knew that God created everything. And Jonah's response to the God he knew was to run. Jonah's response to the God he knew was disobedience. Jonah's response to the God he knew was to do what he wanted to do. And God still pursued him. Verse 11 says, the sea was getting rougher and rougher, and they asked him, what should we do to make the sea calm down for us? And this is Jonah's crazy answer. He says, pick me up, throw me into the sea, and it'll be calm. Can you imagine knowing God that well and having that much faith that you're like, throw me into the sea, God will calm the storm. Throw me out into 101, the traffic will stop. That's crazy. Nobody would do that. But Jonah knew God's heart, and Jonah knew what God would do. But it says the men, instead of doing it, they had to look for other ways. What they start to do, they start to row harder and harder. But it wasn't working because it says the sea grew wilder than before. Finally, they gave that up, and they started to call out to the Lord, not even their gods anymore. They started to call out to the Lord. Please don't let us die for taking this man's life. I picture just weather, rain coming all over them, crying out. Don't hold us accountable for killing this innocent man. And they took Jonah. Sorry, dude. Threw him overboard. And then it says the sea grew calm. But look at what happens with these men. It says they greatly feared the Lord, and then they offered a sacrifice, and then they made vows to him. So we can summarize that by saying God's grace is revealed in the storm. See, sometimes God will send a storm to bring us to a place of surrender, to reveal his grace to us. He'll send a storm to get us back on track. Your life has had or will have a storm that you can't control. It could be a sickness, divorce, job loss, broken friendship, just fill in the blank. But this is an opportunity, when this happens, for God to reveal his grace to you right in the middle of that storm. When a storm comes, if you surrender to God, it becomes a place where you can experience his grace and the power of the Holy Spirit. The place where you'll experience the peace that surpasses all understanding. And it'll become the place where you know that you're in the palm of Jesus. But this happens when you surrender. Every storm is not from God, but he is over every storm. And even the storms he did not cause, he'll use to work in us and through us his will for us. Before the sailors threw Jonah into the sea, it says they tried to row, but it didn't work, and the storm only grew worse. And this usually happens because instead of surrendering, we try all these other ways. You see that all throughout the Bible. We see it in our lives. We try everything else. And there's some here that may have been rowing against God's word for your life. You've been trying to row your own way. You've been trying to do your own thing. But what you're rowing against is exhausting because you're rowing against God's will. And you'll never win that. And the sailors, they started crying out to the one true God. They started praying to the one true God to save their lives. They offered a sacrifice to the one true God. They made vows to the one true God. And this is a place where We can guess, we don't know, that maybe they became followers, Christians. That term wasn't there yet, but you guys know what I mean. They were rowing against the will of God, and then they too surrendered to the will of God. And Jonah's response to the God he knew was to run. The sailors' response to the God they just met was to surrender. And Jonah's he's the one that's supposed to be the man of God. He's the one that was supposed to know that, the power of God, and he knew that God would calm the sea. And he was the one that God wanted to use for his will and his purpose. But he's the one who ran. And it was the sailors that didn't even know God. They just met him, and they're the ones who surrendered. When the word of the Lord comes to our lives, we can be like Jonah and run, or we can be like God. We can be like the sailors who row away from God. But either way is not going to work, because the storms will only get worse. And they'll get worse until we surrender. And right in the middle of that storm that was caused by someone else, that was caused by Jonah, God revealed his grace to the sailors. Our sin affects others. When we surrender to God's will, many times God's grace will reach the others that were affected by our sin. If you're right in the middle of the storm, now's the time to surrender to experience that grace. And if a storm comes your way, surrender sooner than later so you don't have to go through that process that God will take you through. All right, we have one last verse, and it's verse 17. It says, "Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." There's been a lot of debate as to whether or not that's a true story or not. And for me, I think we just need to look at Matthew 12, verse 38 to see what Jesus says about it. It says, Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here." So Jesus was explaining that he would be buried, and on the 3rd day he would rise, and he uses Jonah as the example. Jesus is the one who said Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. If Jesus says it, I believe it. If Jesus lied, that means he would have sinned, which means he would have been resurrected as a sinless, perfect God. But since he was resurrected, he told the truth, he was sinless, and so we can believe that it happened. And then Jesus said, something greater than Jonah is here. Remember, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but through me." Jesus is God, and Jesus is saying, you can't get to heaven, you can't get to the Father except through me. There is no other way. How much sometimes we want to think that. It's hard for us to believe sometimes that there's only one way. So I want to close by reading something to you. This is something I heard. I didn't make this up myself, but I thought it was powerful. It says, the word of God came to Jonah, but Jesus came as the word of God. Jonah ran from the Lord's presence, but Jesus came to bring the Lord's presence. Jonah was the sinner who ran from God, but Jesus is the God who runs to sinners. Jonah came as a Hebrew sinner, but Jesus came as the Hebrew Savior. Jonah could not command the storm to calm, but Jesus commanded the storm to calm. Jonah was thrown into the storm of God's wrath for one time, but Jesus was thrown into the storm of God's wrath for all time. Because of Jonah, some were saved from one nation, but because of Jesus, multitudes were saved from every nation. Jonah was in the fish 3 days and 3 nights, and Jesus was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah needed a Savior, and Jesus is Jonah's Savior. Amen. So early in the message, I asked some questions. What is God speaking to you? What has He been asking of you? What is God's word to you? What has He revealed to you? What has He requested of you? What does He have for you? What has He requested in your life that He wants to change? And what has He commanded you to do? You have a choice. You can be like Jonah when he ran, or you can go through the process and be like Jonah when he surrendered. Here, let me pray for us. Father, we thank You for Your word. We thank You for people like Jonah, that You give us real life stories, real life examples of who You are. You revealed Your grace to him. You revealed Your compassion. You pursued him. Jonah did not deserve that, but You pursued him anyways. You did whatever You had to do to get his attention so he would surrender his life to You. And Father, I pray that if there's anybody here, including myself, maybe I don't even realize if I'm running, if we're running what You're asking us to do, if we're running from things that You've been wanting to do in us, help us to get to the place where we stop running. Because what we know, You're good, and what You have for us is good. We know that the things that we hold on to, sometimes the ways we go, the things that we pursue, separate us from Your will and Your love for our lives. Father, I pray that You would draw us to You. Continue to reveal Your compassion, Your love, and thank You for pursuing us. Thank You for loving us. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.